the truth is that that's how most education is. Education is mostly about loading people up with stuff that other people, you could say, have thought. But the teachers don't think much about what they teach. They simply teach what they're told to teach. You run across that teacher, like Mr. Moran, okay, or Tom Gage, they blow you out of the water because all of a sudden they're saying, you can think. You don't have to listen to me think. My obligation as a teacher is to get you to become smarter than me because I'm an evolving human being. And that evolutionary process, if it's enriched by other intellects, is like, that's where it is, man. That's where you find the sublime. You don't need pot, you don't need LSD, damn it. Your mind is wondrously wired to be able to come up with ideas that nobody's ever thought about before. Wow, that is really something. Yeah, my name is Stephen Lafer. My latest degree, my last degree, was a PhD from the University of Oregon in education, English education in particular. I have a master's degree in the teaching of writing from Humboldt State University in California, and I have a bachelor's degree in English from University of California, Davis. All right. Well, the reason that I got into what I got into was for maybe not an odd reason. I think there are other people that have had the same experiences and gone down the same path. But my education until my senior year was a bad experience. I did not like school at all. School didn't like me. In fact, I finished school at a private school because I had, with the urging of the principal and everybody else at the public high school, enrolled or left the public high school. It was terrible. I mean, I simply did not find anything there for me. I hated the social ridiculousness that went on with being a high school student. I didn't like the whole idea of the athletics being so prominent, and I thought I was a pretty bad student, thinking that I was incapable of doing much. So I went to a private school, really small, and in Beverly Hills, and I met a guy, he was a teacher named John Moran, who was out of his mind. And it turned out that he was kind of like, became the first real English teacher I ever met, who was really not thrilled. Literature was it was interwoven with his life. I saw that English helped to explain oneself to oneself, and I needed a lot of explaining. Um, and this guy, he had us read things like "What Makes Sammy Run" and "Catcher in the Rye" and "Lord of the Flies," and we had these incredible discussions that were not about how you get to an answer on a test, but what the book meant in terms of who we are and how we think. I guess that's what I found out is I learned to be my own psychiatrist through literature. And I also love to write. I was a bad boy in school, but I wrote like crazy. I have kept journals since I was probably 12, and I was really involved in the politics of the time. Again, something that earned me scorn because those were the days of the anti-Vietnam War demonstrations and the civil rights movement. And I took on a pretty radical view of the world. And there was, for the most part, parents and teachers in the mainstream school, they just thought, well, what we should do is stamp out these people, or at least the way that they think, and reorient them to what is good and right, like what J. Edgar Hoover says is good. Really, that, I mean, that, the heroes of the time were people like J. Edgar Hoover and Ronald Reagan and all that. And, anyhow, so through this teacher and a few others at this little school called Rexford, and I went there with some really interesting people who thought like me, but a lot of them were the sons and daughters of famous people like Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, and I'm trying to think of there were several. Two of them were Burt Lancaster's son went there. The guy who wrote What Makes Sammy Run's son was there. It was just really something, and they were pretty crazy people. They used to sit under trees when we went to PE. I really didn't know what they were doing, but they were smoking pot and they were giggling around. And so, I hooked up with them for a while. I mean, but they lent to the conversation in the English, the humanities classes, a dimension that I didn't even know existed. That I learned that rebellion was an academic field. And so I really didn't sign up for English. I signed up for rebellion and got to know that the authors I would read all the way back were never these staid people that the English teachers had tried to make me think they were, or the social study, they didn't walk around and do things properly. They were troublemakers, and I particularly loved what, Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley and Byron and Keats, and these guys were nuts. And so I thought, wow, these are my peeps. And that was my way to become enamored with English. But I hadn't had any teachers that taught English that way, but I saw that it could be done. And that was when I didn't then think about becoming a teacher. At that time, it was a very different ethos for people who went to college. Well, maybe not all, but people like me, we went to college because college was a place where you got to continue this conversation about ideas. And I went to Los Angeles City College because my grades until the senior year were so bad that I didn't know if I'd ever be able to find my way to another institution of learning. But there was a community college, and I met a guy named Lafer was his name. Lafer, yeah. And he was another one of these guys. He was like this English teacher who was just bonkers smart, and the conversation was like even deeper and more visceral than. So we'd read a book and take off on it. It was a world literature class. We read Dostoevsky, and we read Tolstoy, and then we read Moliere. I mean, just all this incredible literature that was hard hitting and wonderfully insightful. And so again, when I decided what I would do after I got out of the community college, I applied to UC Davis and I got in. And again, I had no intention of becoming a teacher. Why would I want to become a teacher? I hated the teachers I had, except for a couple. But I think they lingered in my mind, and that if I were going to do anything that had to do with social change, there was a better way than going out on the streets and demonstrating. But the way to do it was to give people a touch of the kind of thinking they could do if they would indulge themselves in the kind of literature that I was beginning to understand was out there, and to begin to see the world in a more humanities-oriented way. And so after Davis, where I did pretty well, I was scared to death when I was a bad student. I had some trouble with my writing. I was really good at getting my ideas done. I didn't know shit about punctuation. So I went off to, after I graduated from UC Davis, I really didn't know. I was once again, I didn't know what I was going to do. I ended up in Santa Cruz, California, and worked for a help agency where people would call in with their problems, and we make them worse. We tried to solve their problems, and it was a really good experience. And then that wasn't anywhere to really go or be. So I took off from Santa Cruz. I hitchhiked across. I flew to Florida. I had a girlfriend there. I lived with her for a while, and then came back. And on my way back, I ended up somehow hitching across the country, and ended up in Humboldt, in Arcata, another woman. And she was great. While I was there, I did, crap work like counted saplings for Forest Service trees that they were going to, and I can't remember what we did, but there was an orchid farm, and we did, we played with the bulbs and did something important. And then I just decided to enroll in Humboldt, and I met a woman, and I'm mentioning these names because they're really important people in my life. I met this woman named Martha Crow, and she was, I had decided at that time that I was going to become a teacher. And the teacher education program sucked, except for Martha. Martha was a reading teacher. She taught people how to teach reading. And she is not typical, because most of the reading teachers that I've met since, they're worthless. I hate to say that, but they are. And dangerous. I may explain that later. But Martha was as sharp as could be, and full of it. She was smart as... And so she took me under her wing, and she introduced me to a guy, a writer named Frank Smith, who wrote a book called Understanding Reading. And it was so radical. It was a psychological investigation into how people think. It wasn't just about reading, all right? It taught me about this idea that people walk around with a theory of the world in the head. I think I probably mentioned that 100 times in class, and that everything gets filtered through it, right? And it grows. So, led to understanding Piaget and his stages pretty well. And I became really enamored with education, but I didn't like the reading thing. So I went up to the English department, and I met a guy named Tom Gage. Tom's still my friend after all these years. He's kind of my friend. We've had a few bumpy bumps, but he was my teacher. He was my mentor. And Tom said, "You know what? Get the hell out of that education department. I'm starting a program called the Masters in the Teaching of Writing program, and you're a prime candidate for it." So the very first year that they had this program, I was one of the students in it. And the program, because of Tom, who was good friends with a guy named James Moffat, I think you may have heard of him in my class. Yes, once or twice. Tom was really good friends with him. They were longtime buddies, and they'd done a lot of work in California for several years, and they all were a part of this group that was revolutionizing and had already started this revolution of revolutionizing the way that English was taught. They were working with a guy in London named Jimmy Britton, And all these people were starting to get together and talk about English and how you teach it, and they were talking about it to teach it in the way that I had experienced, and that experience changed my perspective on the world in profound ways. So here it was just good timing, all right? And so I got into that program, and partway through it, Tom invited Jim Moffat to meet with me, and we sat down at a table, and we had this wonderful conversation, and I became friendly with Jim Moffat. I still, on my wall, usually have a letter that he wrote me at one point in my career when I was writing an article about him. And I took off, and I tried to push this notion of enriching people's notion of their own humanity, and to use English to give people the sense that they had these incredible minds that produced incredible ideas, and that language was the tool by which that was shared. It didn't go very well. Once I got out of school, I went, oh, by the way, then I did a PhD. In order to teach at universities, you have to have a PhD. So I did get a job after Humboldt. I went up to a place called Glide, Oregon, which was a logging town, and the kids hated English because, it was taught from the textbooks. It was taught grammar based and all that, and they didn't care much about English at all. They were logging kids. They wore baseball caps, and they chewed tobacco, and they spit a lot. And so did their parents. And their parents weren't exactly ready for me either, this liberal, crazy person trying to corrupt their kids. And so, I taught there for a while, and then I just got a sense that if this was what education was about, it needed to be changed. So I went to the university where I applied to the PhD program. I got in, and I again, it was an education, college of education. I didn't like it much. There weren't a whole lot of ideas filtering around. The people you read were pretty dull. But I did meet a woman named Christine Chalet, who was an early childhood educator, and she introduced me to Piaget. And Piaget and Moffat it was like, okay, I get it. This is the universe. This is like the Higgs boson of, it just all clicked, Now, I'm not a Piagetan, but I do appreciate the approach that he took and what he told us about how people grow as thinkers. And that's what was interesting. Most of education is how to put stuff in kids' heads. Piaget, all right, and Moffat and a guy named Vygotsky were all about how the head works and how you teach to thinking, all right? You don't just teach them that Shakespeare was the greatest writer. You study Shakespeare, and if the kids figure out that there's something great there, and you can do some guidance. The presentation is important, but to, load things up at the onset and say, Shakespeare's great, and by the way, you'll like him whether you like him or not, is the stupidest damn thing in the world. And you know what? The truth is that that's how most education is. Education is mostly about loading people up with stuff that other people, you could say, have thought. But the teachers don't think much about what they teach. They simply teach what they're told to teach. And when you run across that teacher, like Mr. Moran, okay, or Tom Gage, they blow you out of the water because all of a sudden they're saying, you can think. You don't have to listen to me think. My obligation as a teacher is to get you to become smarter than me because I'm an evolving human being. And that evolutionary process, if it's enriched by other intellects, is like, that's where it is, man. That's where you find the sublime. You don't need pot, you don't need LSD, damn it. Your mind is wondrously wired to be able to come up with ideas that nobody's ever thought about before. Wow, that is really something. But I never got that from my teachers. All right, they wanted me to take the tests. They wanted me to make them look good. They wanted to teach me grammar. They wanted to teach me the names and dates, right? Even in science, which is like mind-blowing. Mathematics, which is like, I mean, all mathematics is really about is thinking. Somebody, the system that you can use in your thoughts to figure out things in miraculous ways. And then you use it in science, and wow, what a combination. But the English language arts are about the very same thing. All right, they're about coming up with, looking at the world, going, what the hell's going on out there? All right, and using the tools of the disciplines to figure that out. And that opened me up to that English should not just be about English. English has got to be about every damn thing out there. So the best educated student in English is one who can read science and just go bonkers by thinking about how the people that are the scientists are thinking through the problems that they have before them, and then using those tools to discover these marvelous things like how to make Skype. I mean, here we are. You know, we're using this incredible technology, and it's all of humans doing it. So once that happened, I then went off to I got a job at the University of Nevada, Reno, and I guess we can talk about that as we go on. But I became a teacher educator. And when I think about writing, I don't think about it as writing. I think about it as expression of thought. And it's a part of this whole range of other means of communicating. But it all starts with thought. And thus, Jim Moffat, and I'm going to botch it, but he said there were really three elements of literacy, all right? And one was conceptualization, right? And that's when you're thinking. So you as a human being experience the world, and then you know this. I mean, you're constantly processing it, all right? And that's the fun part of life, really. And if you really get into it, you don't need Pokemon, I guarantee you. Because you can say, let's poke around rather than play this stupid-ass game, all right? Because every minute there's something that's happening. I mean, I can take you and I look at you, you're wearing those headsets, right? That headset has all this stuff in it, right? And it works somehow so that you can hear me, all right? And that little thing coming out picks up your voice and sends it to me. Now, how long can you think about that? Well, for eternity, if you really wanted to, because you don't have to just think about what it's made of, but what it's made of, all right, does something, all right? And when it does something, it affects what your headphones have to work with your auditory system. And then all of it works when we're conversing with language. And if you want to start screwing around with trying to figure out language, I mean, there are linguists out there that for years, what is this thing called language? How come the Chinese speak Chinese and the Japanese speak Japanese? And then when you get to written language, you even get... So, I mean, it's like, okay, I don't have enough time in the day to think about all this stuff. And if I think about Higgs boson, in the mix, or I think about what the hell is Josh doing there in Japan, there's always food for thought, right? Moffat said that you know, all language starts with conceptualization. I mean, you have to have something to say, right? And so in an English class, that should be a good part of it. Ideas, 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 thought, 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 ideas, ideas, ideas. It should be, the teacher should be a provocateur. And every time the students land on an easy answer, all right, you begin to explore the complexity, all right? You can, and again, you can start with their own lives, okay? They may think that their lives are simple and mundane, all right? You just think again about being situated in the world as a human being with a brain, all right? And even when you're sitting on the couch and supposedly doing nothing and watching television, all right, you just say, well, so what just happened to you? All right, how did you put all that together to come to the conclusions that you came to? All right, what did whoever put that TV program on do to you? Or another question that I love to put out there, I love music. I love so many different kinds of music. I haven't tried Japanese music yet, but I listen finally to some Chinese music, of all places, at Disneyland Shanghai. Horrible place, don't go. But anyhow, you think about music. So I say to my students, okay, how many of you like music? Everyone. So I said, what is music? They were totally, I mean, it was like the most incredible question they've ever heard. But think about that for a moment, all right? I mean, what is it? And why does whatever it is in its various forms have the effect on our heads that it does? Now, most kids I know listen to music constantly. And they know that it's incredibly satisfying, but they don't know why. Well, how many things in the world do we encounter that either satisfying or not satisfying and never think about it, right? And that's what you need to do with kids. You need to put a fire under them to recharge, not to teach them how. They learned that when they were born. Okay, it's to recharge their curiosity. So if you want to do that conceptualization thing, you throw out things that are curious, all right? And then you explore to find out, to satisfy your curiosity. And you can write about that process. What I found out about myself last night through a dream, let's say. Wow, we have these things called dreams. And we wake up from them, we just go, I had a dream. No. I had a dream. What the hell is a dream? You know? And what's the relationship of a dream to reality? All right? I woke up from the dream. How do you know you woke up? That you're not dreaming, that you're dreaming that you woke up from the dream. That puts your head into a bit of a spin. All right? Why are human beings attracted to each other? What is this thing called love and sex and wah. You know, and again, you can explore it simply by reading stories, or you can explore the rest of the world. And that's what I would hope students would do, that this conceptualization element. And English has this unique position because it doesn't have a subject matter. It really doesn't. Literature is not about a subject. Literature is not a subject. Literature is about subjects. And if you read widely, literature is about every subject on the face of the earth. All right? So, and it's about every subject on the face of the earth and the way that human beings are able to think about it, and then the consequences of the way they think about it. That's literature. It isn't just a story where you go and look and see how many adjectives the writer has used, whether he uses long sentences or short. If you pay attention to that, you ruin the book. Guess what? 99.9% of the English classes do exactly that. They ruin literature. You would have an incredibly literate... Okay, so my philosophy, I don't want to lose that thread, is that you start with conceptualization. The English class, you get kids talking so much about so many cool things that they can't shut up. And then you shut them up and say, right. And I've done it with kids. They write. They may not write properly, whatever that is. Well, we do know kind of what it is. But, okay, so it's conceptualization, and then you don't just go right to a page. You talk about it. Verbalization is what Moffat would call it. And you do a lot of talking. Vygotsky knew this too, that the way we grow as thinkers and language users is through language. And when do we use it? We use it naturally. Babies, as soon as they possibly can, start talking. Right? Nobody teaches them, here, baby, learn a verb. Let's practice verbs and let's practice nouns. And it's nonsense. What happens is that language is a really interesting tool for expressing self, for putting self into the world, and then getting feedback about who the self is by doing that. Well, Vygotsky, said that that's how we learn it. It's through this conversation where we end up, I talking to you, and you give me not only new words, but new concepts, all right? And for those concepts, I have to have the word because I'm excited to talk about them. Well, kids are really excited to talk. You got to tell them to shut up all the time. That's one of the most important things that a teacher does, right, is tells kids to shut up and learn. It makes no sense, right? Silent English classes are ludicrous. So now you have the students and they're talking to each other and they're also disagreeing with each other, or they're not making themselves clear to each other, right? And so when they're not understanding each other, you have to elaborate, right? When they don't understand, you give them more information, all right? I mean, that's exactly what you do when you write. What do I need to say next? Whatever the person who I'm trying to communicate with needs in order to get my point. It isn't that you need more adjectives. You could get by with no adjectives at all. Okay? There was a guy, Hayakawa. I can't remember the name of the philosophy that he engaged in, but he and they actually started a movement that really was important, where you never used pronouns. You never reduced human beings to pronouns, all right? And that's really a weird idea, all right? And it turned out that the movement went away. People continued to use pronouns, but, use pronouns why, all right? I mean, you use pronouns and he didn't get this. You use pronouns because they have this force that a noun doesn't. When you say he, your reader has to go who. And you have to go back to what was said before. You actually have to knit together the text. And one of the things that forces you to do that is words like he or she that are really vague and have a referent in the conversation that you can't know unless you have been listening, all right? So it's like this wonderful language is just like mind-blowing. All right, so you get kids to understand that. If you want to teach grammar, it isn't that you need to use grammar. You need to learn grammar and in order to understand better what you can already do pretty readily. But I don't know if a kid by the time, if they're 3 years old and they can't use verb, there's something wrong, all right? Every kid knows verb, and they know a lot of them, and they're able, this was Chomsky's wife, amongst others, and Chomsky, who thought about that language box in the head. Totally fascinated by the fact that people are fluent with language like automatically. Think about that. I mean, it's just like how this very complex thing. And when you're in China and you think about Chinese language, little kids don't go, "Oh my God, I've got to learn Chinese," and it's really difficult. They pick it up. By 3 years old, they're pretty damn fluent in Chinese and Japanese now. So you got this verbalization. So people have to learn to talk, and they have to do what Vygotsky says. They internalize this critical thinking process, which is simply going, okay, I've arrived at this idea. Is it right? And you go through and you try to figure it out. When somebody's talking to you, they ask the questions. When you've internalized this process through a lot of talk, you do it on your own. I mean, you talk to yourself a lot, I imagine, don't you? Yeah. You don't have to put that on. I know I can. That's I'm listening to you. I'm trying to read your lips. But anyhow, so here's this process. What the classroom needs to look like, or any occasion, and you'll do this. Do you have kids yet? No. Okay. Well, if you're working around kids, and if you have kids, you'll notice that they don't understand something. All right. You explain it. They say something you don't understand it. They explain it. And guess what? Both of you are getting better at being able to shape a message so that it's cogent and understandable, right? That's English. Now, what do you do when you write? You've got to be the two people, all right? You're carrying on that conversation with another person, but they're not there. So you've got to, anticipate, or even, it's more than that. You think about writing in the most powerful way. It's about trying to suss other people out. Would I say this to Josh? Do I need an example here? Gosh, I'm trying to get into Josh's head, right? And so if I say something to Josh and I think I've gotten into his head and I know what I need to say, but Josh goes, revision, all right? And a lot of the teachers that teach now talk about revision as though, it's an item, a commodity. It's not a commodity. It's a response. It's a reflex. Yeah, I don't get what you're saying. I can turn on the microphone. I didn't, don't do it. But I would say that. That would be having read what's going on, why my message is not getting across, as would be if I put a pronoun in and I will see you go, who? I realize that you either missed the referent or I didn't give you the referent, right? So now this sounds complex, but this is the simple kind of thinking human beings when they're engaged in the language process, and they do everything that one needs to do in order to write, all right, in conversation, except that when they go to writing, the conversant is their image, their notion of who that other person is. And that person can't correct them. So what you have to be able to do is put in all the information up front, anticipating how Jack is a real jerk, how Josh is going to react to that. Who's Jack? All right, Jack actually is this dog of mine that's laying under my feet right now. All right, absolutely fascinated by what I'm saying. I hear him snoring, okay? But anyhow, that's the process. So my philosophy then is that, and it's very much Moffat, and it's very much Jimmy Britton, and it's very much all these people who in the 1960s came together to go, they said, there's something wrong. Most people don't learn to write well, and it isn't that hard. And as they did their research, it turned out to be that teachers make it hard for people to grow linguistically, especially at the beginning when you throw in that phonics stuff. I mean, what? And spelling quizzes and the close exercises and all of this nonsense. What you're doing is you're using your time not to practice using language, but to describe language. And you try that with baseball. All right, think about trying to figure out how to bat by being told, all the parts of the anatomy. All right, you need to flex your whatever muscle. All right, you need to make sure that that bat is moving at this speed. All right. Think about all that and see if you can hit that ball when it's coming at you. Now, in conversation, the challenges to what you have said, whether they are a misunderstanding or a lack of agreement, they're coming at you like that. At least the speed of a ball coming at a bat. Right? Now, do I need a verb here? Do I need a... You then lose everything that is rich about the language experience, all right? There is a guy, and he's at USC. And I'm trying, Steven something, I can't remember his name off the top of my... He's still around because I get emails from him every now and then. He talked about this thing in teaching foreign language called the monitor theory, where you're trying so hard after you've had gone to Japanese school, right? Do I need a verb or do I need a... Well, they'll correct you if they care to hear what you have to say. Or if they care to hear what you have to say, or you care to hear what they have to say. Language is best learned through engagement with other people speaking the language for a purpose, right? And I don't know if you remember this, and I'm not quizzing you, but I talked about this thing called the rhetorical triangle. And the rhetorical triangle has, at the bottom, the subject, what people are talking about. And up in this corner is the sender, the communicator. And over here is the receiver, right? And what's happening is that that communicator knows something about that subject that he or she feels the receiver deserves to hear for whatever reason. There's a purpose there, right? And that struggle begins the minute that decision is made. I'm going to get Josh to understand what I understand. Now, that's what you practice over and over again in the course of life, and that the English class helps you refine into the most cogent, the most potent, the most effective kind of language that you can form it into, all right? And so the philosophy then is what a lot of people early on in my career called a language-rich classroom environment. It's a vibrant place where people are reading literature, because guess what? Literature helps you understand how people think. That's what authors do. They think about how people think, and then they make their characters think like they think people think, right? So you learn about, you listen to speeches, you listen to, you analyze television programs, right? What are these people thinking? What are their motives for doing what they do? How did this experience cause them to be motivated to do that? And if you think about that way that you think about literature, you begin to think about how a writer does this dual process of thinking about his subject, thinking about who he's talking to or writing to, what they know about the subject, how you can best get them to understand the subject as you understand it, considering who they are and what they know, all right? And that's how you go sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, okay, thinking, well, here's what I've given them so far in relation to what they knew before. Here's where they are. Here's what I need to give them next. And that's it. language-rich classroom environment, to get at that conceptualization. I mean, the minute I speak to you, you think about what I'm saying to try to understand it. That's the act of conception. Here's what I understand, verbalization, all right? You're not here anymore. You're in Japan, and I don't have Skype. I write it, okay? And then as I write, my whole act of writing has nothing to do with anything else about getting what I understand or what I want you to understand over to you through the medium of language. And I don't have to get students to write to do that. If I focus on writing from the very beginning, I'm never going to get them there. Most of the practice comes from interaction. That step to writing, as Jim Moffat said, is really the easiest one. It's just like, taking something and transferring it into another form. It's getting that something, that message that conveys what is in my head into your head so that you'll begin to think about it the way that I do. That's the hard part. And you'll find nouns and verbs and whatever else, adjectives, to do that. Best example of something that ruins the potential of a human being to use language well is teaching something like phonics, all right? That's so counterintuitive. It's anti-thought. You have to listen to somebody telling you how to pronounce words in ways that nobody else pronounces them in order to get it so that the sound letter correlation is right. Spelling. The way that we deal with the teaching of the language arts early on is disastrous. It gives students an orientation to language that it is something difficult, that you need to study it in order to be able to use it. And as I said to you, you don't need to study it. You need to use it. Now, it is fun when you get to be an old fart like me to study it, I mean, there's a point in life where, and you can do a little bit of that, show kids how incredible language is by maybe discussing a little bit of linguistics every now, but they don't need to know that stuff. They don't need to know the parts of speech. They don't even need drills in how to punctuate, all right? So all of that stuff, and which is part of the initial orientation to the learning of language, which is absurd because you can't teach them language in the schools unless they know language. Even foreign language. You can't learn a foreign language unless you know language. What do you teach them with? Going, I mean, I don't know what you do. All right? So, and that's a whole nother thing. English is a second language, but so what you don't want to do is you don't want to complicate what is already something that's very complicated. You don't need to have students understand the mechanics of language in order to use the language. That's obvious, all right? And when you focus in on the mechanics, then you have a classroom where nobody is having the kind of experience with language that makes one want to become better with language. Again, you can think of all the motivations you might have for learning Japanese. For me, it would always be a girl. I can't speak her language. Okay, so there we are kind of looking at each other. That happened it didn't happen because I wasn't going to be there long enough with Turkish, all right? I was on a boat and there was this woman that was just absolutely incredible. And I couldn't speak to her. So I had to walk away. I felt, it was really a terrible experience, right? And again, that same kind of motivation motivates kids to learn language and to become more sophisticated with it. All right, you don't have to. Are you going to teach kids the word Pokemon? Do you think it should be on their, vocabulary quiz tomorrow? Some teacher's going to do that, and nobody will want to play the damn game anymore. All right, so again, this idea, the counterpoint to the language-rich language environment is that environment where the kids never talk, they learn from the books, they read a story and answer the questions at the end. There's very little discussion, and if there is discussion, the teacher's constantly going, well, that's not right. No. The kids need to do that. And then the kid who somebody else is saying is wrong says, no, I'm right. And then the kid who said that they're wrong has to prove it by going back to the evidence. Sounds like what you do in an essay, right? Okay? So there is this natural way to teach writing that mimics the natural way in which people learn language. And that is because language serves a purpose. And if you put them in a situation where that purpose is constantly right in front of their eyes, right before their ears, they're going to practice language and they're going to learn how to become more sophisticated as the ideas that come into the conversation are more sophisticated, take more sophisticated language to get others to understand them, all right? Vygotsky talked a lot about this process of scaffolding. And if you haven't read, and if your teacher's not giving you a dose of Vygotsky, he's just incredibly insightful, all right? Wrote back at the turn of the last century, all right? God, so he's old. I mean, this is out of date. Come on, I mean, science is smarter than English teachers. They build on, they still appreciate Copernicus and Newton, right? So anyhow, this natural language environment, the things that interfere are anything that take people away from the act of trying to communicate. Anything that belittles them, like putting literature out there that they can't possibly understand, and then telling them that you can't understand that, all right? Giving kids the wrong kind of poetry, I think that's one of the worst, right? Hardly anybody likes poetry, and most of those who say they do are liars, all right? I mean, you go and this is a survey that you and your colleagues can do, but go explore bathrooms, all right? What I mean is that most people have reading material next to their toilet, right? I guess they now have it on their iPhones is what they do. But, see what's on there. Are they reading poetry? Do people really set aside time in the day and go, hey, because I'm going to take Jack for a walk after I'm done talking to you. It's a really enjoyable part of my day. I don't think most people have a part of the day that is reading poetry that they're salivating to get to. All right? Now, why is that? Poetry is so good. Shakespeare's great. I'll bet you can do a survey how many people think, the greatest part of their English education was Shakespeare. I mean, if they're honest, But and Shakespeare is great. But it doesn't get great, but you need to talk about Shakespeare. You need to talk to Shakespeare. Wow, in your imagination as a reader, you talk to the author? Yeah, that's a good reader. All right, why the hell did you do this, Will? Why did you have her die? Oh, I think I'm getting it now. I understand why she had to die. The story wouldn't have been the story and well, what story? The story I'm working, you're trying to figure out. Wait, I'm trying to figure out a story. This isn't just a story. These are words written by William Shakespeare. who was a human being just like I was, that's trying to mess with my head. And then you're into the money, the honey. Let's call it the honey. I don't like capitalism much. Then you're into the money. Now you go and you read a book, and you're writing. You're writing notes back and forth to William Shakespeare or to Percy Shelley or to any of the great, and you're beginning to go, oh, it isn't great poetry just because he put these words down on paper. The genius is in what he did to me, or she did to me, all right? And if you just let yourself go and get out of that academic mode, you let the words flow over you. And you don't kick yourself in the ass for not getting it because it's going to be on the test tomorrow. Because then you're blowing the whole game. You're reading for the wrong purpose, and you're missing the author's point. He did not read it. He would have written the quizzes himself or herself, or the questions in the back of the chapter. Get rid of that stuff. Let the students ask the questions. Why the hell did he say this? The minute the student asks that, you go, why did you think he said it? I don't know. Somebody in the class, or the teacher scaffolds, Vygotsky's idea, all right? That you have a teacher in the room just to keep the conversation going. Really, to push it so that it becomes more confounding, all right? You want students to struggle with ideas. And the minute they struggle with ideas, I guess you could say, when you write something, it's doing the struggling with the ideas for another person. And in doing that, you gotta struggle to get the meaning yourself. So reading literature is really, or any kind, it's not just doing it so that you could answer questions. That's the damn problem with almost the schooling, why people are so damn stupid most of the time. Because they, instead of processing what is being said as another human being, communicating with another human being, they're not communicating. They're listening to another human being who is smarter than they are, and they're trying to be able to get down what they're being told. Whack, bad, miserable. That's why we have so few people that even want to be intellectuals in the world. They don't know what the hell it means. To be an intellectual is to read Noam Chomsky and go, what the hell are you saying, Noam? And then you'll find that 90% of it you can get yourself. If you're really into Noam Chomsky, you might go and find some of his other work to clarify. You might look at people who've written about Noam Chomsky. So you know how we have kids that go out and do reports on pieces of literature and they go look to the scholars. Well, the reason they go to look to the scholars is because the teacher has said you need to have so many citations in your footnotes, right? The real scholar goes out and finds those other work because they're trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And when that other person helps them figure out what's going on, they go, ha, that was helpful. Citation. So let me put it this way. When you ask me about what the problem is not like, let's just change something that, we do. Let's come up with a new and better way to teach nouns and verbs. The problem is that systemically, the educational system, at least in the United States, is anti-real education. It's anti the kind of education where ideas and concepts cause the learner to go, huh? What's going on? I need to explore. That is not a part of the educational system. The classrooms need to be places that encourage exploration. They need to be places where the teacher says something or another student says something and everybody says, wow, that's interesting. All right, there's a process like that, and it's called the something table, and it'll come to me. Moffat used it when he taught at Phillips Exeter. It starts with an H, the Harbin table or something like that. And it was a method of teaching that was really funny that they even called it a method of teaching, but they would, a lot of the rooms at Exeter, Phillips Exeter, had these oval tables, right? And all the students would sit down at the oval table and they'd be talking about a book, and a student would say, well, I think so-and-so is what Mary Shelley was about. And so another student would say, no, I don't think that's it. And somebody would say, well, we need more information. Bam, a student got an assignment right there and then. The assignment was to fill in the blanks, to go out and do the research, to fill in the blanks that were discovered as the conversation was going. That sounds like writing process. I go along and I reread my piece and I go, oh man, Josh is lost here. Never going to figure it out. All right? I elaborate. I get more information. I do whatever I have to do. So get rid of 90% of what we do right now. Make the classroom a conversational place. Talk about it. The teacher's role is to come up with ideas that blow students' minds. All right? The provocateur. Walk in and you go, I hate music. How can you hate music? Well, I don't even know what it is. Explain it to me. Student goes, how the hell do I do that? I don't know. I'm the one that's asking you to explain it to me because I don't appreciate it and you do. Topic for a paper, a good one. Research paper instead of why somebody's feet smelled and why, what's her name in Great Expectations? Why was she such a bitch? Well, that's actually a good question, okay? All right. But again, why did Shakespeare use iambic pentameter? That's a stupid question. You go, okay, let's read it. And you get somebody who's really good at reading Shakespeare so that the cadences come out, all right? The lyricism comes out. And then you might get back to, do you hear a rhythm here? I mean, is that what they know the word rhythm, right? Because they know music. And it's an exploration. Why did he use an iambic pentameter? Maybe you even have an exercise where you take his poem and you take it out of iambic pentameter. And you go, any difference? That's exploration. You see what I'm getting at is that instead of the teacher being the person with the wealth of knowledge, the teacher demonstrates how a person with a wealth of knowledge goes about becoming knowledgeable. That totally rips apart the whole fabric of education based on teachers being able to read the textbook and then give it back to the students, whatever. And not only that, with a teacher's aid, a teacher's manual that tells them what to ask the kids and how to answer it. What a model. That's the model of stupidity. No, teachers there, teachers going, you know what I just saw today? And I don't understand it. You know what I just read today? You know, I was reading Frankenstein again, and this part of it came to me, and I just don't remember. And a kid raises his hand and goes, maybe it's this. Why don't you write a paper about that? You know? Or even this, all right? There is, out of the whole language movement, there was a part of it called the language experience approach to teaching writing. Okay, and what would happen was a kid would dictate a story to me, right? Tell a story. And kids can tell really good stories, right? So the teacher would record it, and then they turn it into a manuscript. And then reading instruction would be using those manuscripts, right? And so then all the kids would read this kid's story. And the kids would go things like, I don't understand why you said this. Did you really do this? Could you tell me more about it? Nobody used a damn thing. It was brilliant. All right? I mean, yeah, here the kid is learning that not only is one a reader, but one is also can be an author, and that other people can pick up your thoughts through reading what you've written, even if you can't write yet. Okay? Because here's that, and you just blow their minds with that. Okay, let me try it again. Let me see if I can get that so that I can do it myself. Early learning should be like this joyous string of discoveries that where the kids' eyes are always just like lighting up with the sense of having encountered something that was phenomenal that they themselves are capable of doing, with ideas that they are capable of understanding, of having thoughts that are worthwhile explaining to others, that when they explain them to the others, those others take them seriously. That's a really good question, and God, it's not an easy one to answer, because it's like, picking out my favorite food or something like that, having to say, well, Mexican food, Greek, they're both pretty damn good, and there have been a lot of good and bad experiences in regard to this career that I just ended. I guess I didn't end it. I'm talking to you, right? But there are some themes that in the last several years have been clear to me, have been dominant themes throughout my life in terms of both how I think, the human, and that's a major part of who I am as a human being, and how I have conceptualized the process of teaching, and there's a richness there in my thinking about this that I really have come to think makes my life worthwhile in a very exquisite kind of way, even though I'm miserable most of the time. All right, and that is that there are a couple of. Let me just start with the thing that I came to about maybe 10 years ago, that I had been looking for an argument that would make people who were violently opposed to my approach understand why it is that approach was one that they should appreciate. And it came out in the. I went back at one point and I said, okay, so what is the most basic notion of what America and Americanism is, right? And of course, I went to the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And I read the Declaration of Independence, and I got to say, it blew my mind. I mean, it absolutely turned out that my study of the Declaration of Independence, doing a really deep and thorough reading of it, made me understand that at the heart of all that I had come to understand as being good and right in the world, and what the purpose of living a life as an educated person was expressed in the Declaration of Independence. So what I mean by that is that it made me understand democracy, okay, and the motivation for, well, it made me understand who would advocate democracy and what their motivation would be. And I just came to, I read a lot of books about Washington, Franklin, and Jefferson, and Adams, and I wanted to hear what their conversation was as they came to these ideas that are now embedded in the Declaration of Independence, all right? And what I came to was that what they were talking about was what it means to live life as a human being. And they were very smart people, and they were certainly a bit biased toward human beings as they knew human beings, which was themselves, all right? And it turned out to me that these folk were amongst the people who were living life to its fullest, all right? Because they were living the life of a human being. They were living the thoughtful life, all right? And so, again, if you go through that declaration, there's a lot in there about the role of thoughtfulness, of thinking, of the reason that they came to for saying that King George was not worthy of their allegiance was a disrespect for the thoughts of men. That's not exactly the phrase. Again, but he disrespected other people's ideas. He didn't, and guess what? That was reason for fighting a revolution. All right. So why was that so important? Well, who the hell are you as a human being if it's not what you think, right? And I go, yeah, right on. Okay, this is it. This is how you kick those people. Most people, I'm sorry, I've got to say it, were too stupid to understand that argument, that I was the patriotic one, that I was the one that was trying to get education to serve a democracy. And the way that I was trying to do that is that you can't have a democracy unless individuals think for themselves and that they listen to each other, because that is the very vehicle of democracy. We are a society that is a debating society. The whole idea of democracy is to debate until you get it to the point where you've got a good enough answer to act. And who should be participating in that debate? The people. We, the people of the United States of America. So that education has to be about people having original thoughts. In other words, democracy is about a community of individuals who think for themselves, that then come together to discuss those thoughts and hone the thoughts till they get to the ideas that are the best ones, and that becomes public policy. Yeah. I got chills. I went, yeah, this is not only democracy, it explains why democracy should be thought about in a positive way, because this is how you get to a point where you have people who are individuals and have their own individual way of thinking about the world, and you get them to come together and to appreciate each other and not beat up on each other, because you understand that those others, even though they're a pain in the ass because they disagree with you, when they're being a pain in the ass, they're pushing you to think more. All right, of course, you don't have as much time to watch TV anymore. Or when you watch TV, you're watching it and going, who thought of this, and why did they think about it, and what do people watching it think about, and what do we need to say to each other about that? all right, everything becomes a conversation. And democracy is wonderful because it has this profound respect for the individual as a thinker. And it tries to create this community which, in the words of the Constitution, tries to always build that more perfect union. We, the people of the United States of America, in order to build a more perfect union, we declare ourselves a nation. Well, whoa, okay. More perfect union, that means that we haven't gotten there yet. Remember we were talking about the writers and people being afraid, not thinking themselves smart enough? Those folk that wrote that Constitution put that in there, a more perfect union, because they realized that they didn't understand those writers either. They didn't understand how human beings thought. They didn't understand why people did the things they did in the way they did. And they said, future generations will continue this process. The reason for teaching people language art skills is so that they can participate fully in democracy. Now, there's one other guy, there's a fellow out there named Paulo Freire. And if you were in my graduate courses, you had to read him. But he wrote a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is an incredibly important book. And he echoed, I didn't realize this, I read Paulo Freire before I went back and did my new history lessons. But Paulo Freire was a Brazilian, and he didn't like the way that schools were operating, and he especially didn't like the way that schools were operating for the masses, for the peasants. So he went out and tried to figure it out, and he wrote this book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And in that book, all right, he the very first chapter talks about humanization and dehumanization. And he says that in our world, even though there are many, many examples of dehumanization, the tendency of human beings throughout history has always been towards greater humanization. So, and he can prove that. Even the guy that killed the policeman, or the policeman that killed, they would all say that they were doing what they were doing to better humanity. The only person that doesn't say that is Donald Trump. I mean, he's amazing. I've never encountered anybody that was so blind that, it's all about me, 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 me. Most people will couch their arguments in what it does for the betterment. Even Hitler, certainly Hitler did that, all right? So what Freire is saying, that there is this tendency that he calls humanization the vocation of man, of human beings, all right? In other words, really, if you think about it, every conversation we have is an attempt to get other people on board, right? If you tell them something's really wrong, the hope is that you'll work together to fix it, to make it better, all right? We have this innate, it seems, tendency to want to improve our quality of life, all right? So now, think about that. Humanization means that you study other human beings, and we do that all the time. That's why we have novels and short stories and biographies and whatever else. We study other people, and if we study them right, it's to get to not just understand what they thought, but how they came to think what they thought. Okay? How did they get there? How did Dostoevsky ever put together a story like Anna? It's just amazing. All right, but now you get back to Tolstoy, sitting there going, okay, next this character is going to do this. All right, next Josh is going to do this. Or next Josh did this, right? Why did he do it? What was he thinking? All right, how did it become the prototype for the popsicle? Get it? And this is why democracy is such an incredible invention, all right? They realized as thinking human beings that the primary act of being a human being is thinking. You know, I was thinking about that today when I was walking the dog, that you could cut off a person's legs and they could still think, but if you cut off a person's brain, they can't walk. So it was my argument against the people that say, well, you know, athletes don't need to think. Bullshit, they don't. That brain needs to talk to those appendages so that they can do the things that they do. All right? So the two most important things then are that human beings, humanity, will grow and continue to grow to be more human. And the best way that we know of for people to grow is in a democratic society, which is predicated on a dialectic. That dialectic being the way we work out our problems and plan our futures, and that it is engagement in that process, that very democratic process, that teaches people what they need to know. If you have an educational system that is about authority, simply saying what authority has to say, and those who are learners noting it down, democracy can't work, because that idea that all men, as it says that are created equal, is violated. Now, it doesn't mean that all people necessarily do the same kind of work or even have the same capacities to do the same kind of work. Not everybody can become a J. Robert Oppenheimer or a Bill Gates, all right? But the only reason that their thoughts are so important is because we've taken them and used them in certain ways, all right? But everybody has this capacity for original thought, and that it needs to be that original thought, that individuality, needs to be understood to be what builds the human community to become a fully human community, all right? And when I started thinking this way, it was like an unfolding. I had come to discover something that I can't really explain to most people because they won't take the time. But it's what I have to explain if I have succeeded as a teacher, all right? Josh is over there. I was his teacher momentarily, all right? But it wasn't that Josh was sitting there as a student who needed to take in what I had to say. It was Josh who was an individual who was thinking about maybe what I was saying and translating it into its newest form, which takes it, if not beyond where I had taken it, takes it to another place deserving of study. Okay? And now we have a society where everybody is an intellectual. Everybody is studying, and their goal in studying, the reason that they study is they know that their studying contributes to the betterment of the quality of life for themselves and to everybody else. And then you have a democracy, and then you have a satisfied human being. I don't go out and shoot Josh because I don't know what the hell Josh is going to say. He might write that fucking song that turns out to be the best song I ever heard in the world. I need to renew this capacity to see the value of humanity. And so I write a lot. I mean, I don't know if you read, I'm on Facebook and I write these long, but you'll notice that word humanity and democracy, they're woven all through it. And when I go back and I think about how I became the teacher I became, all right, and why I did it, I always had that notion of humanity in my head because I was a rebellious human being who wanted to think for myself and not be told to repeat what somebody else told me. And damn it, the people who wrote the Constitution and the Declaration, they were on my side. They weren't on J. Edgar Hoover's side. They weren't on Mahatma Gandhi's side. They were on my side. They said, go for it and speak what you think. My teachers never let me do that. Schools have to be revised. That college of education I worked in, forget it. Misteaching 99% of the time, right? Are there good teachers out there? Yeah. And they're the ones that struggle the most, because when somebody tells them to do something that they know they shouldn't be doing, because of their humanity, they can't do it. They can't teach phonics, even though they're told to, because they realize that phonics is poison. They can't teach history as though the people who wrote it really know exactly what happened, or that there's no room for interpretation, because by doing that, they give people a misconception of history as a field of study, as a tool for living as a human being. So again, individuality became really individuality in a humane community, all right, that strives to create that more perfect union, okay? The educational system serving that process and no other. It is not about getting jobs. People will get jobs because they're smart enough to do the kind of thing that the kind of jobs that are needed, that they've participated in creating a need for, all right, are out there. And so, yeah, they're not only going to get the jobs, they're going to create the new world out there that provides for a higher quality of life, and they're going to participate in building the economic system and revising the economic system. They're going to be the ones who participate in revising the political system. They're going to be the people who participate in revising the educational system. Why? Because they know that they are capable of making life better for themselves, and that they can do that even better by collaborating with each other, so that the ideas get honed, that dialectical process, so that they become smarter, so that everybody becomes smarter, so we can do more smart things. That's it.